Welcome into the Paul Farrington Show. Paul joined by Robert Ziggy Ziegler at the University of Virginia for a Packers-Seahawks preview. It's always fun when these two teams meet, Ziggy, especially in the mid-2010s. You had a little bit of a rivalry spark up with, of course, at the Packers' expense most of the time. I'll never forget watching the Hail Mary game, or especially that NFC Championship game, which Packers fans are probably furious I've even brought up. But it was a fun rivalry for a little bit there in the mid-2010s. And you really weren't watching football at that time too much, were you?
No, but there's one thing I knew. When the Seahawks and the Packers play, the home team wins.
Yeah, that did tend to happen. And going to Seattle was really the stuff of nightmares for Packers fans back then. At the time, when you're like kind of a teenager, or right before becoming a teenager as well in middle school, you really enjoy football. I think of like the rivalries, the hatred a little bit more. And that was like peak, me hating the Packers. So I'll never forget watching those games. And Aaron Rodgers, Mike McCarthy, Jordy Nelson, Brett Kuhn. Like you had all these players that I came to dislike. And there was some sort of like enjoyment of watching them play as well, because if I wasn't watching the Vikings, I was going to watch the Packer game. And I just remember those games in particular being so happy when when the Packers would lose in heartbreaking fashion. But there was some enjoyment you get during like your middle school days of being a football fan, and those games were great too. So here we are now, 10 years later, a decade later, and none of the players overlap anymore. Although Aaron Rodgers is still in the league. He's about the only one, him and Russell Wilson from that time. But what do we have? We have Jordan Love and Geno Smith playing, two teams that are expected to go to the playoffs, a game that is very possible to be a preview of a wild card matchup in round one. And the Seahawks, what's at stake? Seattle is 8-5 right now. They're leading the NFC West, and we've talked about it quite a few times now. The Rams are right there. Every game matters to Seattle at this point out. And at the end of the year, we could be looking at a Seahawks-Rams game that could determine the NFC West. So for Seattle, the more separation you could create, they would hate to be in a scenario where it's win and get in at the end. That could happen. On the other hand, for the Packers, they're holding on to the 6th seed right now in the NFC. And we've mentioned so many times how important it is to be at that 6th seed, because if you go to the 7, you're going to get Detroit or Philadelphia in all likelihood in the first round. That's the game you'd rather see in the divisional round. They're trying to hold on there, even though the division seems a little bit out of reach. So let me ask you, Ziggy, initial thoughts on this one right here. Green Bay going into Seattle. Where's your mind at right now looking at this game? Still quite a few days out.
The single most important matchup that I want to watch is the Packers pass rush versus the Seahawks offensive line and Geno Smith. The offensive line for the Seahawks has been terrible this season. They've given up 40 sacks. They've given up 19 in their previous 5 games. And that's with Smith not taking a single sack against Arizona. So you take that out, it's 19 times in 4 games.
Yep.
When Geno Smith is under pressure and when he is getting hit, this offense does not look good. But when the offensive line plays all right, when the pass rush can't get there, what you've got for the Seahawks is one of the best wide receiver trios in the NFL. People sort of forget about DK Metcalf. He's still a very, very good player. Tyler Lockett, still a solid player. Jackson Smith and Jigba having sort of an under-the-radar breakout season as the leading receiver for this team. If the Seahawks are able to get time for Geno Smith, I am worried about the Packers secondary with all of their injuries and their ability to play against these receivers. Javon Bullard might be out. Evan Williams is almost certainly going to be out. Zane Anderson, he's a solid player. He was good for them, but it's Zane Anderson. There's a reason this guy's a special teams player. Eric Stokes had a great game last week, but Eric Stokes has had such a bad season up until this point. I just don't trust the Packers secondary. So the Seahawks, their offensive line's not good. And this Packers pass rush that everybody thought was going to be so good this season. I feel like we were talking about them every other episode this offseason. There's so much talent. They've been good occasionally, but they had a bad week against the Lions last year. They were only able to get Goff once. If they get 1 or 2 more, they probably win that game. It's critical that the pass rush shows up for this.
Yeah, and I mean, you didn't even mention Jair Alexander too, right? Of all the secondary players who are injured right now.
I just assume he's never playing the way it's been this season, right?
He hasn't played since the Bears game back on November 17th. But you're right. The Packers pass rush needs to be able to get home. One thing that Geno's done a lot this season is let go of the football. And I mean that both from interceptions and actually fumbling. He's fumbled 7 times, but Seattle has recovered all 7 of them. And then he's 3rd in the league in interceptions with 12 on the season. So Geno, he's loose with the football straight up. Like he drops the football a lot. And Green Bay's got really opportunistic defense where what's the best way to get a quarterback to turn the football over? Pressure him, get after him. So you're right. I think that is a key matchup to watch. And it goes hand in hand, though, with the injured Packers secondary, because if Geno has time, I agree with you. Jackson Smith and Jigba, a lot of people haven't watched a ton of him this season, but he's taken major steps forward to competing with DK to be the number 1 receiver on that team. And that's a pretty big step because DK Metcalf's one of the biggest stars at the position in the sport. So I'm completely with you there. As far as Geno goes as well, it's interesting. I've kind of been thinking, as the ESPN app gives me an alert right here, I've been thinking lately about what Geno Smith's future in Seattle is going to look like. And I'm feeling pretty confident at this point in time that Seattle's going to move on from him following this season. He's got 1 more year left on his 3-year, $75 million deal that he signed. But this is one of those games for Geno where if you want to stick around next season, go get this game. Go get these final 4 here, go into the playoffs, win a game. You get to the divisional round, and I think you're in pretty good shape actually then to stick around for another year, for that last year. Maybe he doesn't get the extension, but the narrative might change on Geno Smith depending on these final 4 games. Because frankly, for however good he is in terms of pass yards per game and all these statistics that he's doing well, and 13 to 12 is your touchdown interception ratio. And most of the times when you watch Geno Smith, you say, yeah, he's stable. He stabilizes the team, and he's had them in the same wild card world for the past few seasons. But you need more. And this is one of those games where if they go out and win this one, and he hasn't turned the ball over the past 2 weeks, something he had been doing for the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in a row before it. This is a big spot for Geno. And I'm not sure it's going to go so well. The Packers are one of the best teams in the league, in my opinion. So I don't have a ton of confidence.
Well, there's going to be a lot on the passing attack because for the first time, I think actually since Matt LaFleur's really shown up, this Packers run defense has been very, very, very good.
Yep.
I know they had a tough start to the season, but you look at what they've done the past 3 weeks. I know it's not fully healthy Christian McCaffrey, but they shut him down. Devon Achane, they shut him down. The Lions rushing attack. I know they had some good numbers, but that was on a ton of carries. It was one of their least efficient games of the season. And I know there looks like there's a good chance Kenneth Walker is going to come back. I know Zach Charbonnet is coming off. Maybe, is that the best game of his career?
It's right up
one
there.
Of them, 134 yards, 2 touchdowns, 7 receptions, like a great game and a huge win. But if the Packers run defense plays as well as I think it will, if they continue this trend, if they're able to limit the effectiveness of the Seahawks run game, you're going to need the receivers. You're going to need DK Metcalf. So yeah, I agree with you. A lot of pressure is on him. And if they're able to win this game at home, I think that solidifies them in division. I think division's close to wrapped up if they can do that.
See,
it shows they can beat a good team.
You're really willing to give Seattle the division win. If the Rams beat the 49ers on Thursday night, it's a 1-game difference still. And the Rams have the previous game.
Yeah. I like the Seahawks team. I don't know what to tell you. I think if they can beat the Packers, they can beat the Rams. It's that simple.
Okay.
I don't know. The Seahawks team, you can't deny it. They've looked really impressive these last few games. They've improved significantly. And if they can handle Green Bay in their building, I think they can handle the Rams.
Well, I think I understand. I get that. They have improved a lot recently. But the games that they are winning, it's been the Cardinals twice. It was the Jets. I haven't seen, this is a chance for them to do it against a team that I really view as one of the better ones in the league. I mean, this is a top 10 team. This is a power rankings team for us. When they played the Bills, they got murdered in Seattle. Was it 31-10? When they played the Lions, it was close. They were battling back and forth, but they could not stop Jared Goff in that game.
And the Lions decisively pulled away at the end.
Yeah. So I do agree with you that the Seahawks are playing much better football right now, but I want to see it against one of the teams that I view as I don't want to say elite for the Packers, but an upper echelon team in the NFL. And this is an opportunity right there. It's funny you bring up the Packers rushing defense, because I just think back over these past few years, I have a lot of friends who are Packers fans, and one of their biggest complaints is always the rush defense. Every single season, how it gets decimated. And finally now you're seeing that unit step up. You mentioned all the players, all the star players that they just kind of bottled up. I mean, David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs averaged 3.6 and 2.9 yards per carry in that last game. And that's probably the most unstoppable duo in the National Football League. One of the more unstoppable duos that the league has ever seen, actually. So it's been really impressive there. And we talk about the pressure on Geno. If the Packers run defense shows up, even more on Geno to win with his arm. And it kind of highlights, again, that pass rush then Packers secondary matchup that we highlighted in the beginning of the episode here. So let's flip to the other side of the ball. As interesting as Geno Smith and the Seahawks offense versus the Packers defense will be. They want to hear Jordan Love talk. And that's what everyone's here for.
I don't think this is Jordan Love's game, Paul.
Really? You don't? Okay, go ahead.
I think here's why. The single biggest weakness on the Seahawks defense is their run defense. It's been horrendous. They're giving up 4.7 yards per carry. They've given up an average of 130 rushing yards per game. James Conner last week put up 5 yards a carry on them. I think this game is Josh Jacobs' game to shine. Now, I know he's coming off a big game in Detroit, right? He had his second 3-touchdown game since the bye week. You might be thinking, all right, we're going to ease up a little bit. I think this Seahawks run defense is putrid.
Oh, you know what? No. I think you're falling victim to what I've seen a lot of the previews fall victim to, where everyone's looking at Seattle on the season as a whole. But the Seattle defense has been very, very different the past 5 weeks compared to the season averages. And rushing yards, you mentioned where they were at the first 8 games of the season, roughly 150 rushing yards allowed per game over the past 5. And that includes, James Conner did have a good game. Last week against the Cardinals was the worst the Seahawks rush defense has performed in 5 weeks. 91.6 rush yards over the last 5 weeks. Points per game. They were allowing, what was it right here? 23.1 over the first 8 games, 17.6 over the past 5. The defense has
also been giving up. They gave up 5 yards a carry to Breece Hall. They gave up 4.5 yards a carry to Christian McCaffrey a couple of weeks ago. Like, that was Christian McCaffrey coming back from the injury, right? This wasn't early season Christian McCaffrey. Like, you're right that they're not giving up huge numbers, but the efficiency's been terrible. And if you bring in Josh Jacobs, who the Packers know they can rely on, I think he's going to get fed the ball.
Wait, what were the numbers on McCaffrey?
McCaffrey, they gave up about almost 4.5 yards a carry. It was 18 carries, 80 yards.
I didn't think that Christian McCaffrey had had a big hold on that game. I think that their rush defense has been much better. But you're right. The Packers' rush offense is better because McCaffrey was hurt. And the
James
Dolphins...
Conner's old.
I think Conner's awesome, and he did have a good game.
No, he's awesome, but he's not Josh Jacobs.
No, Josh Jacobs is the best back of all the guys we've mentioned. And another difference there is, the Packers have the most explosive passing offense of all those teams. And maybe you can argue Miami, but cold weather to a different animal. Josh Jacobs could take over this game on the ground. I don't think he will. I think in Seattle, with the way the defense has been performing, I think he'll have his numbers. He's one of the best in the league for a reason. But I don't see him completely taking over the game. Jordan Love will have to make some throws. Seattle is a middle of the road team for me. We talked about it just yesterday. They're kind of that threshold for, do you consider yourself a contender or not? If you can beat Seattle, you're a pretty good team. And if you lose to Seattle, you're probably a first round exit or missing the playoffs. And I really do believe that. So the separating factor is going to be, does Jordan Love in that second half, when it matters, is he going to be able to go against Devin Witherspoon, Reek Wallen, some of the better, Witherspoon's one of the best cornerbacks in the league. When that stadium's going crazy, will he be able to make a play? And over the past couple weeks, particularly the second half against Detroit, that's about as good as we've seen Jordan Love this season. So I feel confident in Love going into this game, a game the Packers kind of need to have. So I feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, I've like a lot of Packers fans have said this isn't a must win. I've seen a few in our comments say it's not a must win because they can go 1 for 4 and make the playoffs. And that's true. If you go 1 for 4 in your next 4 games, the Packers, you probably make the playoffs. But what that's missing is that even though the Packers have a lot of wins, they are jockeying for standing in the NFC wildcard picture. I know the division's sort of a pie in the sky, but they're 9-4. The Commanders are 8-5. They're pretty close. The Vikings are ahead of them at 11-2. But the gap between getting that 6 seed and that 7 seed is enormous. 6 seed, you're probably heading to Seattle.
Oh,
Maybe you're heading to LA to play the Rams. 7 seed, you're heading to Philadelphia. Or if the Eagles surge and the Lions collapse, maybe you're heading to Detroit or Minnesota. You would much, much rather be heading to Seattle than facing the Eagles, than facing the Lions at home in the playoffs. There's no doubt about it. And I know it's easy to say we're 9-4, the Commanders are 8-5. We can sort of sit back here. The Packers have a tough schedule coming up, and the Commanders just don't. I mean, the Commanders have to play Philadelphia, which is tough, but otherwise they play the Saints, the Falcons, and whatever this Cowboys team is. So I'm not saying there's a great chance, but you need to keep, if you only go 1-for-4, I think the Commanders can go 3-for-4 in those games and get ahead of them, catch right back up. So I think it is critical that the Packers win this game in order to solidify their spot in that 6th seed.
Well, you know, I'm really looking, if I were a Packers fan, the unit that I'm looking at for a big bounce back performance is the offensive line. Remember the first half against Detroit, particularly that first half, they were getting dominated by backups. The whole story of the game was Detroit's backups and of backups playing. And they came out looking possessed. I mean, those guys, I can't remember who's O'Connor or like there were dudes on Detroit you never would have thought you'd be seeing playing meaningful snaps on a football field who were playing their hearts out and frankly kind of dominating the Packers up front for a while. We talked about Josh Jacobs having 3 touchdowns. Well, he averaged 3.7 yards per carry, 18 carries, which hit your over of 16.5, by the way, for only 66 yards. It was not. If you just were told, hey, Josh Jacobs had 3 touchdowns tonight, you'd think he ran wild. That was not the case. The Detroit defense held their own. The backups against the Packers up front, who've been a pretty good unit. Against Seattle, you're playing a team that's 15th in sacks per game. You know, their rush defense has not been particularly good for most of the season, even though we just had that whole argument. Go win against that unit. A unit that had struggled earlier in the year. If Seattle comes out and they're capable of it, like Leonard Williams is having a defensive player of the year kind of season quietly. Oh, yeah. If you go out, but you got to go out there and earn it against the Seahawks defense that you should be able to push up front.
I'm really happy you brought up Leonard Williams because he's, I think, on the Seahawks defense, awesome. The player to watch this game. In his last 3 games, 2 of them, he's had 2 or more sacks. Like, this guy has been getting hot at exactly the right time. He's got 7 on the season. And like you said, he doesn't get tons of coverage from the media, right? He's not the big
not anymore
defensive lineman, not these days. But he's having, I mean, this is the best season of his career since that 2020 Giants year. Like, this is one of the best seasons of his career. He's sort of having a little bit of a resurgence. And yeah, if you're not able to stop him, he's very good. He's one of the few defensive tackles that's very good both at run defense and at pass defense. You can't run at him, and he can get past your defensive lineman. I mean, you saw him like that 93-yard touchdown a couple weeks ago, right? Like, he's fast, he's big, he's strong. You absolutely need to find a way to contain this guy.
Well, that's what I was going to say is if you look back on this season and highlight one play for the Seahawks at the end of the year, the interception return against the Jets, if they wind up going to the playoffs, that might be it. Because that game, if they're pretty close to Aaron Rodgers throwing another touchdown pass to Garrett Wilson, and that game gets out of hand. The next play you have the Leonard Williams pick 6. They're able to win that game that was looking like a loss throughout much of that first half. I think you go back, and that Seahawk performance, that Leonard Williams interception, is probably the one that you're going to look at and say that was the difference maker of getting this team, propelling them to a playoff spot.
I mean, he is a difference maker.
Yeah. They have a number of them on that defense. Since Ernest Jones came over via trade, that's when you saw all of these changes happening statistically for Seattle. It's been pretty crazy.
Woolen, nobody talks about him anymore. He's a great player.
No, Mike McDonald has done a really, really good job. Like, that defense, they were putrid at the beginning of the year. And right now they're playing borderline elite football. And the Packers are a great test. That's why this matchup's so fun in so many different ways, is because Packers have some things to prove. Seattle defense, well, you know what? Hell, why don't you go do it against one of the best teams in the league? I think there's a lot on the line here for both teams, even though it's not a must win in terms of being eliminated or anything like that. This is a huge momentum game, and one that I think both teams could really use for various reasons. The Packers avoiding that 7 seed, Seattle barely holding on to the division. So I can't wait to see it. Who do you have winning, Ziggy? Right now, we'll do it again later in the week, but as of right now, this comes out on Wednesday morning. Who are you picking?
I'll be honest, the speech just made me believe in the Seahawks defense. I'm a big believer. I've said this a lot of times, that when you bring in a new guy of a new scheme, it takes players some time to get used to it. But once it starts clicking, it gets a lot better. I really want to take Seattle in this game. They're starting to get hot. I'm a big fan of what they're doing there. Believe it or not, I've been against them all season. I think this Green Bay team is just a little bit too good. The Seahawks might prove me wrong. If they win this game, I'm changing my tune very, very quickly. But I think this Seahawks team is just not good enough. Even at home, even getting hot, even with some critical players coming back from injury, to beat this Packers team. Because the Packers, too, even though they're coming off a loss, they, too, are starting to get hot. The run defense has been lights out. The pass defense isn't great, but it's improving. Jordan Love is finally starting to return to form. More receivers are starting to get involved. And I think Josh Jacobs, I know I said it. I know you don't believe it. I think he's going to be the difference maker this game.
Oh, it's
so
not that I don't.
have to go for the Packers to win, but a close one. Yeah, I don't think they're running away with it.
It's not that I don't believe in Josh. I believe in Josh Jacobs. I just believe in Josh.
You believe in the Seahawks run defense more than I do. That's what it is.
Yeah, or I'm just willing to acknowledge that over the past 5 weeks they've been better. Now the thing is, though, last week was the worst they've looked over that stretch of games. So, will they revert back to who they were before earlier in the season? We'll see. I'm with you though. I actually stand exactly where you do. I think Seattle's a good football team, maybe slightly better than I've called them throughout much of the season, but this is kind of, they are exactly, I've said this every episode we talk about Seattle, they are exactly who I think they are. And I expect them to be a first round exit. Now, winning the division was unexpected for me because I didn't see San Francisco having such a bad year. That could change things being at home. But I think Seattle's very good. I don't particularly trust Geno to be good for an entire game. He might, have an explosive couple quarters, but I always lean more towards him making a big mistake than being flawless. And I think the Packers are just a little bit better. The one caveat I'll put there is what happens with these injuries in the secondary. If Jair, Evan Williams, and Javon Bullard are all out, which, we'll see as the week goes on in practice. That's not improbable at all. Then I might change tune a little bit. But I'm expecting, I would think that Javon Bullard's probably going to play. Don't take that. Don't anyone take that for granted. Like, I have no idea.
I'm just making
stuff up right now. If they get a couple of their guys back, I feel pretty good about Green Bay. If the secondary's injured, I'll revisit it later this week. Right now, I do think the Packers are just a better team, so I will go Green Bay to get a big win on the road. But we'll see.
I'll just say this. I've never, ever heard a coach, when asked about a player immediately get injured, say it's week to week, and then the guy plays right away without missing any time. So I don't know where you're getting this Javon Bullard stuff from.
I will be completely honest with you. I totally just thought to myself, he's probably going to play.
Fair enough. It's
there's no reason behind it. I know it's an ankle injury.
He's walking around on crutches today.
Yeah, bad intel. Javon Bullard, I guess, probably not playing, but don't take anything I say.
I mean, like you say, though, that means there's a decent chance they've got all three of those guys out. Romeo Doubs might not be back for this game.
Dude, Jayden Reed didn't have a catch last week. He had one target. Like, get him back involved. How is he not part of the offense? Although you don't see him throwing a fit.
There are a lot of players that could get involved for this Packers team, which is why, even with the injuries, they've kept rising up to them. I'm not picking that to sink them now. But you're right. At a certain point, every team except Detroit, when they get a bunch of injuries, ends up falling short eventually. Detroit, I mean, if you can get guys off the street and have them play great football, I mean, there's an endless supply of guys who aren't in the NFL but want to.
Well, I'm not worried about the Packer offense. I'm worried about the Packer defense.
No, I know, but I just feel like if those injuries on offense cost them just a little bit and the injuries on defense cost them a ton, that might be enough.
Yeah.
Right?
No,
that's
Seattle's
what I mean.
good.
If with all these injuries on defense, you need a lights out offense in order to keep up. Because I really think like Seattle's not a bunch of pushovers. This is not the
Wow. I did not think you were going to say pushovers when you started that.
I don't know what you expect from me, man. They're not, but you can't just go in there and dominate them, right? They're going to play good football. They have a lot more talent on this team, I think, than the national media sort of recognizes. Like there are a lot of some of the best players at their position on this team. So yeah, you've got to come in, be prepared, be as healthy as possible and play good football. I think the Packers can. I've been really encouraged by what I've seen since the bye. I'm encouraged by the run defense, but we're going to see. This is a big test for them. You have to win this game if you want to prove to me that you can compete in the NFC.
Yep, totally agree.
All right. I don't think they care about proving anything to me, but maybe they do. Maybe Jordan Love's watching and saying, guys, Ziggy said we've got to beat the Seahawks this week or he's not going to believe in us. We're really counting on him. Packers fans of the year over here.
Could you imagine they're getting in the huddle for a game-winning drive and they're like, and you just see all of them like, hey, remember what Ziggy said about us? Remember Ziggy said we couldn't get it done in this building? We're not a contender. Let's shut him up. I'd love to see Josh Jacobs run in the end zone. Just start screaming at the camera about you. That's what I want to say. All right, we'll be back with tomorrow with the full Week 15 preview episode. See you soon.